Live from a studio in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Your host of At the Edge, Boo Lamb.
Well, hello, DevCentral community. My name is Boo. I am one of your community evangelists with the DevCentral team. Really excited to be on with you guys today. Today is my solo show, so I'm on my own with a guest, Michael O'Leary, which I'll bring on in just a couple moments here. But on At the Edge, we talk about edge computing topics specifically. And for edge computing, a lot of this is based around Kubernetes workloads. And so, being able to decompose an application, turn it into microservices, and having some of those microservices run closer to the edge of your network as an administrator and closer to the client. Now, part of that journey, I think for a lot of people that would be coming from the NetOps type of mindset would be taking things that they already know from running servers in a VM environment, infrastructure as a service perhaps, and being able to actually work with those decomposed applications in the form of containers. And the technology that everybody is flocking to right now in order to do that is Kubernetes. And today we're going to be talking about specifically that exam, the Kubernetes Certified Kubernetes Administrator exam that's released by the CNCF. We'll go over it in a little bit more detail here with Michael, but this exam I think is at least the curriculum that I've seen so far, and I've gone through some of the curriculum already for it, offered by one of the training providers out there, is a really good level set on what you need to know as a Kubernetes administrator. I think they've done a good job of being able to outline for everybody, outline all of the things that you need to know through this exam. So I'm interested personally in checking this out. Last week, we actually did a show on what your home lab looks like. And in my home lab, I talked about my ESX servers and how that was important to me and is still important to me. But that technology was important to me to learn, even though I wasn't a VMware administrator. It was important for me to know as a network operations person in terms of the servers that I would work with. And so I feel like we're at that point today. This is now in my lab, a Kubernetes environment, and being able to operate Kubernetes is, I think, an important part of people's jobs. At least the last couple of years, important for certain people. Right now, important for a lot of people, and I think going forward, it's going to be important for everybody. So, having said all that, that's going to be the focus of the show today, talking about that exam. Before I do that, I'll remind everybody, if you're not going to watch to the end, I'm going to remind everybody at the end as well. But you want to hit subscribe on this show. If you're watching from YouTube, there's a little button down here, probably. Click that to make sure it goes from red to gray. There's a little bell icon as well, so you get notified when we go live. If you're not watching from YouTube, you might be watching from LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. Be sure to subscribe on those platforms. Also, in the show description, there's all the different things that you can do to follow us along. devcentral.f5.com is the website where we all hang out as well. So, without further ado, I am going to bring on my guest today, Michael O'Leary. Hey, Michael, how you doing?
Good, Boo. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for jumping on. You're actually a veteran of the show at this point. I don't know if people have realized. I'm sure the people that are faithfully following the DevCentral live streams know that you've already been on, but this is your second time on the show. So thank you very much for joining us again. We didn't scare you off that first time.
It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, cool. Maybe for the audience that didn't get to meet you that first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at F5?
Sure. I'm a solution architect at F5. Typically, I'll help customers going through the migration from data centers to the cloud, or from sort of VMs to containers, workloads. And a lot of that is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that's awesome. This topic came up because you've talked about this internally as well, and we, at least at F5, a lot of the folks kind of in your organization are, I would say, not necessarily incentivized, but they're motivated to get these certifications. And so for you, did you have any specific motivations for getting the Certified Kubernetes Admin exam done?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about it. Something sort of went off in my mind, and I thought I should go out and get certified in this technology. But I think in the process of doing so, I really came to appreciate the technology more than the certification itself. As we all know, certifications are great. They're a great way to prove that you know something, but the process of learning is what's most important.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's cool. We'll get into that perhaps, but I'm guessing that with what you described, you're having these conversations every day with folks around Kubernetes technologies at this point.
Pretty much every day, yep. All of our customers are moving towards Kubernetes. So we're seeing that in the industry wide, Kubernetes is becoming the de facto choice for container orchestration platforms. And of course, it's the underpinning of popular technologies like VMware's Tanzu or Red Hat's OpenShift container platform. So knowledge of Kubernetes is becoming very important. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. And what and maybe we'll get into this in the stuff that you're going to talk about, but for when we say Kubernetes, I think it was a little bit different when we talked about VMware before, because with VMware, a lot of people went out and got the VMware Certified Professional certification done, but that's fairly hypervisor specific. Whereas something like Kubernetes is, hey, there's Kubernetes as a project, and then there's vendors like a Tanzu, like a Red Hat that are putting their flavor, their seasoning on top of that, right? So it's kind of interesting to do an exam that's kind of more foundational as opposed to hypervisors were kind of separated by vendor before.
That's a really good point. And I didn't think to make it myself, but yeah, Kubernetes is an open source project, right? It was originally sort of developed by Google and then sort of gifted to the public. And so when you're studying Kubernetes, you're looking at the technology, not usually anything from a particular vendor. And while vendors do have their own sort of flavors of these, really what you need to learn is the underlying technology. And the course that we're talking about today is run by a nonprofit, the Linux Foundation. So it's not a third-party specific technology, and there's an emphasis in being agnostic to underlying cloud providers or third parties. Obviously, you and I work for what we call a third-party provider, but today we're talking about a technology, not a commercial platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I find it pretty neat in that way. And so, I think even just in some of the first certifications that I was doing, they were Cisco certifications. And so I went through a CCNA and a CCNP and some of the stuff on the design side as well. And I got my first job. Well, I was doing that at the same time, but I had a couple of those first before I got my first job in network engineering, and I went to work for a place that ran all Cisco. So hey, all's well and good. I know Cisco, and so I can work with all the Cisco stuff. And then I moved on to consulting after that, and all of my certifications were Cisco. And then I got dropped into a job where we were not a Cisco. Well, we sold some Cisco, but we were not primarily a Cisco reseller. And so I had to go through a lot of um, refactoring of my opinions of stuff. Cisco had proprietary protocols that I couldn't use anymore. All the products that I was used to, all the command line stuff that I was used to, like I had to remove all of this and then kind of flatten it out to be able to work with all the other products that I had to work with at this point. But I think that's nice with the CNCF and the Linux Foundation to kind of put together a very well produced exam to kind of get people up to speed on the foundational topics.
I totally agree. I've done the same thing. It's been a couple of years since I took industry certification, right, an exam. And then about 6 months ago, I took this exam, and I appreciated it for exactly that reason. Chances are you're going to work with different implementations in the times that in whatever job that you have, but the underlying technology is what matters. That said, most of the customers that I talk to are running a fairly vanilla Kubernetes type environment. There is very rarely a time when I'm limited by what a vendor has sort of constructed around it. So it's you'll definitely come across different things no matter where you start.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's cool. Do you think it's a good time to bring up? You've got some slide prepared here to start talking through some of that stuff.
That sounds pretty good. I put
Yeah.
together just a couple of slides to talk about what is the CKA, or the Certified Kubernetes Administrator certification. So if you want to flip through these slides, what the heck is it? You mentioned the CNCF before. That's the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And this is the organization that create this exam, if you like. And then the Linux Foundation administer the exam. So when you do go to take the exam, you have to create an account on the Linux Foundation website in order to take your exam. But this is how you become a certified Kubernetes administrator. It's a great way to either prove to employers that you know Kubernetes, or if you don't, learn Kubernetes yourself along the way. So it's kind of a what is Kubernetes. And then if we move on to the next slide, we'll talk about what's in this exam. If you're already familiar with Kubernetes, it's likely, if you're anything like me, that you have one area that you're stronger in and other areas that you're weaker in. So the exam, they tell you up front, is going to be comprised of these 5 domain sort of knowledge areas. And you can see that the installation of a cluster and how to architect a cluster is pretty highly weighted at 25%, and troubleshooting is also very highly rated at 30%. So these are things that I did not have strong skills in when I started the process to study for this exam. I'd use Kubernetes, but I would always come into a project halfway through after the cluster was built, and I would help troubleshoot these network-specific things. So general troubleshooting and how to build a cluster from scratch were things that I learned. Otherwise, we talk about workloads and scheduling. That's sort of how to run pods and where pods can run inside a cluster. Services and networking, that was my strongest area coming in because I'm a network guy previously. But we talk all about how services are accessed inside Kubernetes, and there's a lot of terminology that's very different. So it's very confusing at first if you're just a traditional network guy. But once you break it all down, it really starts to make sense. And then finally, storage, only 10% weighted in the exam, but things like what is a persistent volume? What are persistent volume claims? How do they work inside container environments where typically containers are ephemeral, so they come and go, but sometimes you want storage to be maintained. Those are the sorts of topics you cover in the storage module. So it's a fantastic exam, and certainly rounds out your Kubernetes knowledge if you already have an introduction, or gives you a ton of comfort and confidence when you're discussing Kubernetes if you're a beginner. Any sort of questions there, Boo?
Yeah, I was wondering when you took the exam, I don't know if you'll cover it later, but the Kubernetes project iterates somewhat quicker than other products out there. Like the Kubernetes version is constantly being changed around. Did you find that the CKA was fairly up to date with versions? Because there's sometimes new commands introduced with each one, right?
Very nice. Yeah, if you want to skip to the next slide, you're perfectly lining us up. I took a course called a CKA prep course, I suppose, from Linux Academy. Now, they're a third party. I had to pay to sign up and take a course from them. So you can take a course from Linux Academy is a popular one, or A Cloud Guru I think is now what Linux Academy was. And there's another vendor out there called Udemy. So there's a bunch of courses you can take. And I just happened to take the Linux Academy course. Now, to your question about versions, they do rev those courses with the new Kubernetes versions. I think maybe Kubernetes 1.22 or so might be the latest version of Kubernetes. And I think when I did this 6 months ago, it was maybe 1.19. So you've got a vague idea. I couldn't tell you exactly when the new versions of Kubernetes come out, but it is fairly frequent. So the course will typically be updated, and a lot of the underlying fundamentals, of course, stay the same, but there are some small changes in arguments and commands and things like that. This slide specifically talks about the different subjects. If you were to study the Linux Kubernetes course like I did, that's the only course I took to pass the exam. But I know that friends of mine and colleagues of mine have taken other equally great courses and also passed the exam. So here's a list. I won't go through them all, of topics to study for in the exam. And then, of course, you want to take practice exams towards the end. After I finished and got my certification, the CNCF introduced official practice exams into your exam sort of schedule for everybody. So when you sign up and you pay the money, which is currently $300 US, to take the CKA exam, you also have access to take a practice exam. You have 2 shots at the practice exam. So it's a really valuable exam. You don't just get to practice as many times you want, just 2 shots at the practice exam. It's very hard. And then you get 2 shots at the real exam. And I've heard, but I don't know for sure because I never got to take them. I've heard that practice exams are even harder than the real exams, which is a good thing if you're looking to pass the final exam.
Well, so the exam, I don't know if you are touching on this later as well. Is it multiple choice or what's the interaction like on the exam?
The exam is interactive. It is not multiple choice. So you need to know all these commands like the back of your hand. There is a command line tool called kubectl, sometimes called kubectl, and you need to know how to troubleshoot. Ideally, you want to turn on autocomplete so that you don't have to type out all of these commands yourself, the entire command every time. And you want to be able to do that fairly quickly because the exam is timed. And I think everybody that I have talked to has really been raced for time to pass the exam. So even if you don't pass all the questions, you need to get a passing grade. And you can get that by focusing on the larger weighted questions first and then moving through the exam as fast as you can, which again brings me back to the point that you really want to know this stuff like the back of your hand.
So can you flip between questions or do you have to finish in a linear way?
You can flip between questions.
Okay. Yeah, very cool. Out of all of these points here, any particular ones stood out as tricky ones to you, or just kind of depends on your background?
Yeah, I included this image of the architecture of a typical cluster where you've got all these components of Kubernetes. This image was really intimidating to me to begin with because I thought, what the heck is a kube API server and what is etcd, etc. And as I sort of slowly mentally broke down this diagram, it all started to make sense to me. So I think my biggest piece of advice would be to build a cluster yourself. Technically, you don't have to. You could just go take the exam, and if you're lucky, you'll pass, and that's great. But there's nothing quite like building a cluster yourself with your own VMs. Personally, I have VMs in AWS on which I built Kubernetes cluster, because that will give you an appreciation for the layers that you have within Kubernetes and an appreciation for the fact that Kubernetes is an orchestration of engine of containers. So hopefully that answers your question, Boo. I don't have control, so let's skip to the next slide.
Just got a comment here that maybe we can go through as well. What time management strategy do you advise for this exam? First, easy questions. How long per question? I think you answered the easy question part.
Yeah. I guess here's my answer to you. I would study really hard, and then I would predict what's on the exam based on the practice questions that you've taken in whatever course you're studying, and also on the practice exams that you get. And there's probably going to be a question about troubleshooting. So see if you can predict what that's going to be. There's probably going to be a question about storage, and that might be like backup and restore related. Or create some storage. There's probably going to be questions fairly well. I mean, they give you the weighting, right? So you're going to be asked to create a deployment and run a pod and those sorts of things. So if you can sort of predict them, I know that I, for example, went straight to the questions that I knew off by heart and then typed them out as quick as I could. So I guess that's one time management strategy. But really, you just can't. It's like any exam that all of us have taken in high school. You can't spend too long worrying about a question that you might have got wrong, or sort of troubleshooting a question you might have got wrong. I've talked to colleagues who have done that, and then they regret it afterwards.
Yeah. And then, I mean, how long per question? I guess that depends on, is there a varying amount of questions for each person's
That's a great
exam?
question. I want to say there were 17 questions. There might have been 19. I think there's 17. It was slightly longer in the past, maybe a year or so ago. I was reading that they had extra security topics, and then they changed, and now they have this security specific designation. So the exam went from, I think, 3 hours to 2 hours, I believe it is now, and I think it's 17 questions. So you can work that out. But the questions are weighted. I want to say some of the less important questions were maybe 4% or 7% weighted for the entire exam, and then the most important questions were about 13%. So if you see a question's only worth 4% and you're not sure of the answer, you can move on. But if it's worth 13%, maybe you spend a little bit of time troubleshooting if you're not sure of the answer. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, cool. Another maybe follow-on question here. Is there a partial score per question?
That's a good question. You're going to have to Google that one. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think there is partial scoring because you, a couple of times it's interactive, right? So that you get this shell session through a browser, and then you are asked to say, find out you go get an object and list all of its properties, and then save that output into a text file. That's what I was asked to do. And so you have to remember, and this is pretty easy Linux command, but you want to get an output and then echo that output into a text file. Pretty straightforward. And then you want to put that text file in a specific location and name it exactly what they tell you. So if you got some of that right, but not all of it, I think you do get partial credit, but don't hold me to that one. Sorry.
Wow. Yeah. So I guess the exams must be manually evaluated after, like if there's variance in file names and whatnot.
Yeah, there's a really good question. I don't know for sure. I've wondered it, and I think I've Googled it as well. You do submit your exam, and then you don't get the result immediately. So it's not like a multiple choice where you find out immediately if you passed. You have, I think, 3 business days to find out. I think it took 2 days for me to get an email to say whether or not I'd passed. And you don't get to know your score, I believe. Some of my colleagues said they knew their passing score, but I don't think I did when I got my email. So that was kind of new. And there isn't a public, well-known passing score. So, I remember taking Microsoft exams back in the day, and you had to get 70%. This is years ago. I don't know if the pass mark is 70%, 80%, 60%. I just don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. Next slide, I guess.
So what the heck do I do to become a certified Kubernetes administrator? It's pretty straightforward. Jump on the Linux Foundation website, linuxfoundation.org. Pay the fee, it's $300 US, and then you're going to have to study for the exam. You can do that any way you like, and then take the exam. You'll take it remotely. You might actually have, post-COVID times, you might be able to take it in person, but at the time I was taking it, I had to take it remotely. I did that in my office at home. It's very strict, by the way. They ask you to install some software to lock down your computer so that they can see your monitor. And if you have multiple monitors, you're allowed that, but they have to have access to them. And then they ask you to use a webcam to show the room that you're in. So nobody else can be in the room. You're not allowed to sort of talk. They have a camera on you the entire time. You're not allowed to wear a watch. You're not allowed to have a drink bottle. I think you're allowed to have a glass of water, but no sort of stickers on the bottle. So there's some pretty strict rules. And it was certainly strict when I took it. So that's how you sort of mechanically go about the process. I would highly recommend registering for the exam, paying the money, getting a exam date, and then it's going to be, you're going to be held to that date. You're going to have to study and pass the exam. You can reschedule, of course, if you need to.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Just a quick note, our research team in the back there did a Google search. They did some extensive research, and they found out that it is partial credit for answers.
There you go. We got this.
Thank you, research team.
Fantastic team. Thank you, Mr. Wagner.
Yeah.
What's the next slide?
Alrighty.
Okay, so this is where I thought you were going with the time question. Where the heck do I find the time? This is a question that I'm sure plagues all of us. So what I personally did was exactly what I just said. I booked an exam, I registered, I paid for it, I let my boss know I was taking the exam, and that really held me to account. I think I studied for 2 weeks, and then I rescheduled my exam by a week because something came up in my personal life. So you can reschedule your exam if you pay the $300 and you schedule an exam. I think you can push it out even up to a year or something like that, and then you can study. I watched the videos. There's a lot of online videos that I watched. I watched them at 1.5 speed. I used practice exams a ton. And then you can always feel free to sort of take the exam when you're sort of semi-confident, because if you wait and wait and wait, then you might never take the exam. You do get 2 shots at the actual exam. And then if you fail the exam twice, I think there's a waiting period before you have to take it again. So, read the fine print, but I always encourage people to take exams and not be scared of failing, because, I mean, it's part of life, right? It's okay to take an exam, and this is how we learn. And yeah, so my last point there is rely on the one free retake. And I probably took 2 or 3 weeks to study. I studied at night after my kids were in bed for an hour or 2 a night. It was painful at first, but I kind of got into it after a while. So it was good. Yeah.
Alrighty. What else we got here? Some more tips.
Yeah, a couple of tips. So people are always looking for, hey, how do I pass this exam? Build your own cluster. That's my biggest piece of advice. So like I said, I spun up some Ubuntu Linux VMs in EC2 in AWS, and then installed Docker on them, and then I installed Kubernetes on top of that. So you build your cluster from scratch, and then you're going to know it much better. Even if you hit little road bumps along the way, maybe you're going to build it in Azure, or maybe you'll do it in your home lab. Any little environment's going to have little differences, which is fantastic for learning. Obviously, use hands-on labs for that too. And then when you're in the exam, you'll read all this when you take the exam, but you are allowed bookmarks. So you're not allowed to have any sort of books on your desk or anything like that. But you're allowed, I want to say 3 different sites. It's like Kubernetes.io, or specifically documentation. So you're allowed access to the Kubernetes documentation, and you're allowed to have bookmarks. So I have like 10 or so bookmarks to like how to create persistent storage, how to troubleshoot a cluster, how to back up a cluster, and how to restore a cluster. These are all bookmarks in my browser. So that's a good idea. And then, typical exam tips like move past a question if you don't know the answer, and then plan for how you're going to attack this exam.
So the bookmarks, they have to be within one of those 3 sites. They can't be random bookmarks, but you can still have bookmarks.
Right. Yeah. So most of the Kubernetes documentation is at a website. I think it's docs.kubernetes.io. So you can go anywhere within that domain. And then there's 2 others. Honestly, they escape me now, but it's not so important, actually. That's all I bookmarked is Kubernetes documentation. But given that you're allowed to search Kubernetes documentation during an exam, which is pretty cool, right? Because when we were kids doing exams in school, we weren't allowed to touch a book. Now that you're allowed to search documentation while you're doing an exam, you may as well have bookmarks to that documentation so that you don't have to remember
site navigation.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. All right. Got last little bit here.
Yeah. What do you do after you pass your exam? Well, you share it with your friends on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever else. So they partner with this program called Credly, which is a way to sort of show your exam status. So I passed my exam and I shared the news on LinkedIn, and that's it's as easy as that. And you'll definitely get a lot of attention after you do that.
That's awesome. We should you should turn that into an NFT and put it on the blockchain. I'm just going to say that right now.
Yes, thank you for that.
That's for the research team in the back. Okay, cool. We've got your last little bit here. Any questions for anybody in the audience, I guess? We got one comment here from Kyle McKay. I don't know who this guy is, but he says this Michael Leary guy is a legend. And
well, Canadians are such nice people. I really appreciate that, Kyle, whoever you are.
Yeah, that's awesome. This has been really cool. I mean, this is all knowledge that I'm personally interested in because I'm going through all that curriculum right now, and I think this is a topic for everybody to go through. So really cool that you're able to share that with us. I know that folks, over in our comment team have left your LinkedIn. So if they want to go see your certification proudly displayed on your LinkedIn, they'll be able to check it out over there.
Cool.
Very cool. All right. Any final words, Michael?
Kubernetes is the future. Like it or not, we're coalescing around a platform for container orchestration, and it's Kubernetes. So, this program, like you said, is at the edge. How do we run compute at the edge? We need to abstract the applications that we're running from the underlying hardware. So It's a great primer. And then after you get this certification, you'll start to see opportunities that you just didn't before. So I'm a lot more comfortable doing this. All of my colleagues that we've talked about and to have been a lot more comfortable with these conversations. So go out there, do it, connect with me on LinkedIn if you like extra encouragement. And thanks for watching.
Awesome. And one more comment here, pro tip from Kyle Oliver. Pro tip, search on the Kubernetes page will present links you can't go to during the exam. Interesting.
Yeah. It's I don't know how it's governed. It might be a bit of an honor system, but you want to go to docs.kubernetes.io is the documentation. So you're allowed to search Kubernetes documentation. You're not allowed to search other websites, and there's actually some like Q&A forum boards and things like that I think fall under like one of the root domains. So read the rules when you take the exam. It's a great tip, Kyle. Thanks.
Yeah, very cool. All right, thanks, Michael. I'll bring you off stage here, and I've got a couple other things to go to. But yeah, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Alrighty, so that was great to go through that stuff. I think we got a lot of info on there. Connect with Michael to go through any of that stuff. Let me just remove this here. I did want to go through a couple things that we do have coming up. So this Thursday, DevCentral Connects returns 12:30 Pacific time. Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. Like the little play on words there, but they'll be obviously talking about the quick protocol and some updates on that. So that should be interesting. You want to tune in for that one. On December 14th, security sidebar, real attack stories. Another great one from John. I love these ones because they make they make it real. All the cybersecurity threats out there that we read about, it starts to get a little bit more real the closer that it gets to you. So, John and his guest being able to tell you that story should be interesting. Another one, this one is going to be a cool one as well. So DevCentral Connects, where are they now? If a lot of folks did not already realize, devcentral.f5.com is a big place. There's a lot of people on there, and we have a lot of interaction on there, and we have a lot of very passionate members on there. Some of those passionate members have been passionate enough that they've become F5 employees. And there's a number of them that we know of. Jason's been around DevCentral for the longest time at this point and was previously a DevCentral member before he joined F5 and became one of the DevCentral Community Evangelists. And so we're actually going to go through and kind of follow along what the careers have looked like for the folks that have joined F5 coming off of DevCentral. So I think that should be cool. And then this one here, I believe this one is going to change a little bit, but Jason will be back with the core in a couple Tuesdays. It says monitors on here, but I think he's actually going to do another one of those live coding sessions, which was super cool. I love being able to see like other people. You could see their cursors move inside of Visual Studio Code and kind of where they're at with things and them typing in messages to Jason. I just thought it was awesome to be able to collaborate like that. Yeah, so otherwise, please do hit subscribe if you like this content on the YouTube. It's down here. Otherwise, on the other platforms, you'll be wanting to follow DevCentral, whether that's LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. And then in the description, you'll see all of the other ways to connect with us as well. So thank you very much, folks. I am going to roll a little bit of a preview for our next show, but otherwise, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
This week on DevCentral Connects. New York, London, Paris, Munich, everybody talk about. Quick uses, talk about. Quick uses, talk about. With the release of version 3, HTTP ditches the transport of its youth, TCP, and embarks on a new journey riding with Quick. Join Jason and John Thursday, December 9th, 12:30 Pacific, as they welcome F5 architect Martin Duke to discuss the value proposition, dive into the protocol specifics, and check in on current industry adoption. The link in the description sets your reminder. DevCentral Connects is live every Thursday, 12:30 Pacific. Shooby-dooby-doo-up, it's all around you. Pop, pop, shoo up, it wants to surround you. Shooby-dooby-doo-up, it's all around you. Pop, pop, shoo up, hit it.